And so we continue to expand on kind of the end of chapter 9. Paul doesn't really go into a new idea here at the beginning of chapter 10. He continues with this explanation and deepening of this idea of how the Jews have not received what they were seeking. And so if we go back to chapter 9, verses 30 through 33, we will reread what we did last week because it is the foundation for this week. And so Paul wrote last time, "What should we say then? Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have obtained righteousness, namely the righteousness that comes from faith. But Israel, pursuing the law of righteousness, has not achieved the righteousness of the law. Why is that? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but if it were by works. They stumbled over the stumbling stone. As it is written, 'Look, I am putting a stone in Zion to stumble over, and a rock to trip over, and the one who believes on him will not be put to shame.'" See, we talked last week that the nation of Israel as a whole, as a complete country, has sought to attain and achieve the righteousness of the law. They looked out at the law, and then they worked in line with the law in order to try to achieve righteousness through their own works. We look at it, they put their backs into it. Sometimes they looked and worked really hard towards that. We see in Scripture, sometimes they just ignored it. But overall, Israel's method and their motive was that they would just work hard enough to be found justified before God. That if they pursued the right things, did the right things, said the right things, then when it came to the day of judgment that they had read about in their scriptures, that they would be fine. That they would find themselves in good rapport with God, that they would be justified. But Paul said last week that they never achieved it and they never would achieve it because they had not looked at it through faith. That they looked at it through their own efforts and their own works. So unlike the Gentiles, they would not achieve the goal of righteousness. See, salvation only comes through faith. It only comes through belief. And so if the Jews still need salvation, as he says it is his heart's desire that they would be saved, he is reiterating the fact that everything that they are working for doesn't achieve the righteousness or the justice that they are looking for. Because they have failed to see that salvation from God's wrath is through one and one thing alone, through one and one person alone, and that is Jesus. If we go back to chapter 5, Paul has already spoken about this. He says, "How much more then, since we have now been justified by his blood, will we be saved through him from wrath? For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, then how much more, having been reconciled, will be saved by his life?" See, they have pursued something that they thought would bring justification. But instead, they have rejected the blood. They have rejected the cross. They have rejected the man that hung on the cross. And they have thrown him out because that is instead of believing in him. Instead of putting their trust in Jesus and his death on the cross, they have put their trust in their own works and their own ways. Turning back to chapter 3, we see Paul has already set the groundwork for this conversation. So he doesn't reiterate all of this. But in chapter 3, verse 20, he says, "For no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. But now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been revealed, attested by the law and prophets. The righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe, since there is no distinction. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are justified freely by his grace, through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God presented him as the mercy seat by his blood, through faith, to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his restraint God passed over the sins previously committed. God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so that he would be just and justify the one who has faith in Jesus. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. By what kind of law? By one of works? No, on the contrary, by a law of faith. For we conclude that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. See, Paul has already demonstrated this. He's already put this forward, and now he is putting Israel in the context of this truth that they have not pursued God's righteousness by faith, that they have pursued it by works of the law. So when Paul shares his heart's desire that they will be saved, he is claiming that they have not been justified as a sinner. They have not received that free gift that justifies them, that God's grace, because they don't believe. They don't have faith. And so he knew what it meant to be a Jew. He knew what it meant to think like them. He knew what they pursued. He knew their motivations. He knew why they did what they did. He knew what they taught. And so he had great understanding into the nature of their thoughts and their desires. And so he says they have great zeal for God. That's a good thing to have zeal for God. The word here has this idea of being excited or enthusiastic for something. Almost overly excited and overly enthusiastic is how we would say it today. Well, we might even use the word someone who is very passionate about a topic or a thing. The word here has this idea of like heat and pressure. That a person who is zealous is on fire for something. We may say something like, this person is on fire for the Lord, or they're burning with desire to accomplish this goal, right? We're talking about zeal. A person may have great zeal for their family, right? They have great passion for their family. Or they may have great passion for a sports team, or great passion for work, or maybe a hobby, right? We will look at that and we'll see someone who is excited and passionate and filled with this like almost heat and fire to go pursue something. So is it good to be zealous for God? Is it good to be passionate for Him, to be excited and to be filled with this kind of like inner fire for God? Shouldn't people be passionate and enthusiastic and excited for God? Should we be that? Well, absolutely. But there are many today in various religious groups that have great zeal, but are still condemned in their own sin. Right? We look out and there are people who have great passion for God, but we would say that they have missed the mark, that they do not understand the things of God, and they are still going to be condemned. They are burning with a life that wants to maybe do the things of God. They maybe even want to know God, but like Israel, they will not achieve what they are seeking. See, Israel is described as zealous for God, which is good. They have this excitement, this heat, this passion. But it is not being lived out, as Paul says, according to knowledge. They have they have zeal, but it's not according to understanding. It's not according to knowledge. Paul is saying that basically they have the drive, they have the want, they have the desire, but they don't comprehend the game that they are playing. See, they have this great zeal. They want to be saved. They want to be justified. They want to be found right with God. But Paul has said that they are going to fail to be saved because of one reason and one reason alone. They are ignorant of the righteousness of God. What does it mean to be ignorant? It means to not comprehend the truth of something, right? They don't comprehend fully what God's righteousness is, what it means. And so in a sense, he is accusing them of the exact same errors that Paul talks about in Ephesians towards the Gentiles. In chapter 4, 17 through and 18, he says, "Therefore, I say this and testify in the Lord, you should no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thoughts. They're darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their hearts." Right? Futile thinking, empty thoughts, lots of thinking, they just don't have the value. Mark 7:6, he answered them, "Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." They said a lot of the right things. They were zealous for a lot of the right things, but their heart was not in the right place. You can hear the complaints mounting as Jesus would tell them over and over and over again that you are ignorant and without understanding. You are out without the knowledge that saves. See, Paul says they did not understand God's righteousness, His nature as a righteous being. They didn't understand how holy He is and that the righteousness is the example or the output of His holiness. They didn't understand how righteous He was. And so therefore, without that full understanding, they didn't understand how holy His justice is. How perfect His justice is. If God is holy and perfect, without blemish or flaw, if He is the one who establishes right and wrong, if God is the one who sets up what is good or evil, and the law is a shadow or type of the righteousness of God, then you must live out all of the law to be found just before God. See, God spoke through the ancestors, to the ancestors by the prophets. The law pointed to God's nature. It pointed to what it meant to be right before God. And we see that Jesus is the full revealed expression of that righteousness, of that nature. See, Paul is saying that when the Israelites looked at the law, they did not see God's character. They did not see how great and unattainable God's righteousness is. Instead of looking to it and being humbled that, God, we can never achieve what you have put down here, they never saw how unachievable it would be to fulfill the law. And they didn't understand that God's justice was tied to that. That God's justice demands full and absolute obedience to the law to be found justified. To escape the condemnation of sin, one would have to be found to perfectly fulfill the law. That any single sin would condemn a man to be guilty before the entire law.